1998. President Bill Clinton signs the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, a law forcing the US government to declassify millions of pages of documents. The result? 8.5 million pages. Documents classified as top secret since 1945. Hidden for 53 years. Why? What was the American government trying to hide for 40 to 50 years? The answer is technically and morally complex. Operation Paperclip brought 1,600 German scientists to the United States. Many were Nazis. Some were war criminals. The US government knew this, and they systematically hid it. Today, I'm going to show you the documented history of the biggest cover-up in American post-war history. The question is simple: why 40 years of secrecy? The answer begins on May 2nd, 1945. Wernher von Braun surrenders to the Americans. With him come 500 rocket engineers. The army knows immediately, these men are valuable. Their knowledge of V-2 rockets is years ahead. But there's a problem. President Harry Truman had issued clear orders: no Nazis, no active Nazi supporters, no war criminals. The order is unambiguous. But the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, has other plans. They are responsible for recruiting German scientists, and they know, without these scientists, America will fall behind technologically. The Soviet Union is also recruiting German experts. This is a race, so the JIOA makes a decision. They will ignore Truman's order, but they have to be careful. The system was simple but effective. JIOA maintained dossiers for every German scientist. These dossiers contained everything: party memberships, SS ranks, war crimes, use of forced labor. Everything was documented, but then came the crucial step. JIOA officers received orders: whitewash the records, eliminate incriminating evidence, whitewash their pasts. Technically, falsifying government documents. How did the falsifications work? Simple. Take Wernher von Braun's file. Fact: he was an SS major, SS officer, member number available, Nazi party member since 1937. Oversaw the Mittelwerk factory with 20,000 concentration camp inmates as forced laborers. 12,000 died. That's what his original file said. But after JIOA editing, a different picture. The SS membership, only nominal. He was forced to join. The forced laborers? He had no direct responsibility. The deaths? Not his fault. Every incriminating piece of information was rewritten, reinterpreted, reframed. The result? Von Braun appeared as an apolitical scientist, a visionary who only loved rockets, not as an SS major who oversaw a death camp. This falsified file then went to the Pentagon generals. They approved his entry, based on lies, and von Braun wasn't the only one. Arthur Rudolph, V-2 production manager at Mittelwerk, he directly supervised the forced laborers. He selected people for punishments. After the war, US Army Ordnance wanted him. His expertise in rocket mass production was unique, so JIOA whitewashed his file. The result? Rudolph came to the USA in 1945. He worked for the Army, then for NASA. He became project manager for Saturn V, the largest rocket in the world, built by a man who had overseen slave laborers. In 1969, he received the NASA Distinguished Service Medal, the highest honor, for outstanding achievements in the space program. Nobody mentioned Mittelwerk. Nobody mentioned the dead concentration camp inmates. His file was classified. Hubertus Strughold, aviation medicine specialist, Nazi doctor. He conducted experiments on concentration camp inmates, altitude chamber tests. People were exposed to low pressure until death, hypothermia experiments. People were frozen to measure survival times, cruel, deadly, war crimes by Nuremberg standards. But the US Air Force wanted his data. Aviation medicine was critical for high-speed flight, so JIOA recruited him. His file, whitewashed. The human experiments, not mentioned. Strughold worked for the U.S. Air Force from 1947 to 1968, 21 years. He founded the Aeromedical Library at Brooks Air Force Base in Texas. Today, it's called the Strughold Aeromedical Library. Named after a Nazi doctor who tortured people to death, his file remained classified until the 1980s. The paperclip system literally meant JIOA officers actually used paperclips. If a German scientist was valuable, a paperclip was attached to his dossier. The meaning was clear. This man is one of us. Don't investigate him too closely. Don't ask too many questions. Approve him quickly. The paperclip was a signal from JIOA to the security agencies, from the security agencies to immigration, from immigration to the State Department. Everyone saw the paperclip. Everyone knew, don't look too closely. This was no accident. This was a system. Organized circumvention of Truman's orders. But why the secrecy? Why 40 years classified? The answers are multi-layered. Reason number one, moral embarrassment. The USA had just won World War II, the war against fascism, the war against Nazi atrocities. The Nuremberg trials were taking place. Nazis were being executed for war crimes. At the same time, America was recruiting Nazi scientists, giving them jobs, giving them citizenship, giving them awards. The contradiction was obvious. If the public found out that SS officers were working for NASA, political scandal, so they classified everything. Reason number two, technological dependence. America was dependent on German technology. V-2 rockets, German engineering, jet engines, German designs, space program led by Wernher von Braun. Without German scientists, the American space and rocket program would have taken years longer, maybe decades. The Soviet Union would have won. America wanted to appear as a technological leader, not as a country that stole German war technology and recruited German war scientists. The image was important, so they classified the truth. Reason number three, Cold War. In 1947, the Cold War officially began. USA versus USSR, ideological struggle, technological arms race. Every weakness was dangerous. If the Soviets knew how dependent America was on German scientists, propaganda victory. The Soviets could say, America can't even build its own rockets. They need Nazi engineers. That would weaken America's position. So Operation Paperclip had to remain secret. The files had to be classified. The truth had to be hidden. Reason number four, legal risks. Many of the recruited scientists were technically war criminals. Under the Nuremberg Code, they could have been prosecuted. If their pasts became known, survivors could sue. German authorities could demand extradition. International courts could demand investigations. This would jeopardize the entire program. So the US government classified all incriminating documents, top secret, need-to-know basis, minimal dissemination. The classification was total, not just JIOA dossiers, also technical reports, interrogation transcripts, Operation Backfire documents, the Story of Peenemünde. Everything was stamped top secret. Even Wernher von Braun's doctoral thesis from 1934 remained classified until 1960, 26 years. Why classify a doctoral thesis? Because it contained details about rocket propellants and turbopumps, information that the American program used. If the work became public, America would have to admit, our rockets are based on this German research. That was politically inconvenient. Operation Backfire, October 1945. Allies launched captured V-2 rockets from northern Germany. They documented everything: fuel systems, control systems, turbopumps, combustion chambers. The resulting report was 749 pages long, published January 1946. Classification, secret, later downgraded to restricted, but not public. Why? Because the report showed how far German technology had come and how much America was learning from it. That was a state secret. The Story of Peenemünde, another classified report, 749 pages, 118 separate reports, contained transcripts of the original U.S. Army interrogations of German rocket experts in Garmisch, heavily illustrated plans of advanced rocket designs, control systems, all classified. These reports went to American engineers at Rocketdyne, at Aerojet. At Convair, they were the basis of the American rocket program, but they could not be made public because they showed America was copying German designs that had to remain a secret. 1962. JIOA is dissolved. A 17-year operation. Most Nazi scientist dossiers are transferred to the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, but not all. Wernher von Braun's dossier? Excluded from the transfer. It remains classified. To this day, it is unavailable to the public. Why? What is in von Braun's file that is so damaging? Only the U.S. government knows the answer, but the fact that his file was specifically excluded speaks volumes. Von Braun was the public hero of the space program, the visionary who took people to the moon. His true past could never be fully revealed. 1970s and 1980s. Slowly, information begins to leak out. Investigative journalists ask questions. Historians demand access to archives. Holocaust survivors identify some of the scientists. Arthur Rudolph is confronted in 1984 with evidence about Mittelwerk factory. He has two options: prosecution in the US or voluntary departure. He chooses departure. He relinquishes his US citizenship and returns to Germany. In 1985, NASA retroactively rescinds his Distinguished Service Medal, but quietly, without publicity. Why? Because they don't want the public asking, how could a war criminal receive NASA awards? The information accumulates. 1980s. More names come to light. Hubertus Strughold. His human experiments become known. The Strughold Aeromedical Library becomes controversial. Pressure mounts to rename it, but the Air Force resists for years. Why? Because renaming it would mean publicly admitting we honored a Nazi doctor who tortured people. That was politically impossible. So the library wasn't renamed until 2010. 65 years after the war ended, the truth came slowly, too slowly for many. Then came the turning point. 1990s. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The geopolitical reasons for secrecy no longer existed. Holocaust survivor groups pushed for transparency. Historians demanded access. Public pressure grew. In 1998, Congress responded. They passed the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. President Bill Clinton signed it. The law was revolutionary. It forced all U.S. government agencies to declassify Nazi-related documents. No exceptions for national security, no exceptions for embarrassment. Everything had to be released. The result exceeded all expectations. 8.5 million pages, that's not exaggeration. 8,500,000 pages of documents were declassified. FBI files, Army intelligence dossiers, CIA files, OSS reports, JIOA memos, interrogation transcripts, Nazi party papers, Nuremberg trials testimonies. Everything was made public. The scale was unprecedented. It was the largest declassification in American history, and what these documents revealed was shocking. Even for experts who knew about Operation Paperclip, the systematic nature of the deception, the extent of the involvement, the number of war criminals. Everything was bigger than imagined. Annie Jacobsen, investigative journalist. She was the first to comprehensively study the newly declassified documents. Years of research, thousands of pages read, interviews with surviving engineers, visits to archives. The result was her book, Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America, published in 2014. The book was a bombshell. Jacobsen documented everything: names, dates, crimes, forgeries. She showed how JIOA systematically falsified records. She showed how Pentagon generals deliberately looked the other way. She showed how CIA directors recruited Nazi spies. She exposed the entire system. What Jacobsen revealed was terrifying. Reinhard Gehlen, Nazi general, chief of military intelligence on the Eastern Front. He had a network of spies in the Soviet Union. After the war, he offered this network to the USA. The CIA accepted the offer. Gehlen's organization became the basis of West German intelligence. Financed by the CIA, led by a Nazi general, many of his agents were former SS majors and Gestapo. The CIA knew this. They paid them anyway. Why? Because they had information about the Soviets. In the Cold War, that was more important than justice. Gehlen's files were classified until 1998. When they were released, it was a scandal. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, Gestapo chief in France, responsible for the torture and murder of thousands of French resistance fighters and Jews. After the war, US Army intelligence recruited him. They used him as an agent against communists. They hid him from French authorities. When France issued a warrant for his arrest, the CIA helped him escape. They brought him to Bolivia, a new identity, a new life, a war criminal, protected by America. His files remained classified until the late 1990s. When the truth came out, it was shameful. Otto von Bolschwing, SS major, an associate of Adolf Eichmann, involved in Holocaust planning. After the war, a CIA agent. They recruited him for operations against the Soviets. He lived in the US. In California, he worked in the technology industry. No one knew his past. His CIA file was classified. In 1981, his past was revealed. He faced deportation, but he died before that happened. His files showed the CIA knew about his SS past. They recruited him anyway, classified his file, hid the truth. The declassified documents revealed a pattern. It wasn't just scientist recruitment, it was extensive collaboration with Nazis. Scientists, spies, military officers, industrialists, all were recruited. All had suspicious pasts. All were protected. Why? Because they were useful in the fight against communism, in the technological arms race. Morality was sacrificed to pragmatism. That was the uncomfortable truth. But it wasn't just America. Great Britain did the same. Operation Surgeon recruited German scientists. The Soviet Union deported thousands of German experts. Operation Osoaviakim, October 1946. Overnight, more than 2,000 German specialists and their families were abducted to the USSR, 6,000 people in total. France recruited as well. Every Allied nation wanted German technology. Every nation compromised its principles. But America classified for the longest, 40 to 50 years. Why so long? The answer lies in the American self-image. America saw itself as a moral leader, the land that defeated fascism, the land of freedom and democracy. Recruit Nazi scientists? That didn't fit the image, so it had to be hidden, deeper, and longer than other nations. The image was more important than transparency, at least until 1998. When the political price of secrecy became higher than the price of revelation, what else did the 8.5 million pages show? Technological dependence was greater than thought, not just rockets, also chemistry. IG Farben scientists were recruited for synthetic materials, metallurgy. Krupp engineers helped the American steel industry. Medicine. Aviation medicine was based on German, sometimes cruel experiments. Electronics. German radar experts. Computer technology. Konrad Züss's work influenced early computers. Every technological sector benefited from German experts. The scale was comprehensive. Without German scientists, America's technological dominance of the 1950s and 1960s would have been delayed, maybe impossible. The documents also showed Harry Truman was systematically deceived. He gave clear orders, no Nazis. But the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, the OSS and the Pentagon ignored him. They falsified reports. They concealed information. They presented Truman with fake files. He signed based on lies. When he officially approved Operation Paperclip in 1946, he thought they were unpolitical scientists. The truth was different. That was insubordination at the highest level. But no one was punished. Why? Because the program was successful, the rockets worked, the jets flew. The technological advantage was real. Success justified the means, at least in the eyes of those in charge. 1969, Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong sets foot on the moon, Wernher von Braun watches. For the public, it was an American triumph. The truth? It was a German-American triumph. Von Braun designed the Saturn V. Konrad Dannenberg, also a Peenemünde veteran, was deputy director. Kurt Debus headed Kennedy Space Center. Eberhard Rees was deputy director of Marshall Space Flight Center. Arthur Rudolph managed Saturn V production. All German, all former Peenemünde engineers. Without them, no moon landing in 1969, maybe never. That's the technical reality, but it was never publicly emphasized. America wanted the glory. The German roots were downplayed. The truth was classified. These technical truths are not just history. They raise questions about morality versus pragmatism. What's more important, justice or technological progress? Should America have recruited Nazi scientists? The answer is complex. On one hand, these men were accomplices to a murderous regime. Some were directly guilty of war crimes. They should have been brought to justice. Justice for the victims. On the other hand, their knowledge accelerated technological progress. Rockets, space travel, medicine. Many modern technologies are based on their work. Should that knowledge have been ignored? Difficult question. But the classification, that's not justifiable. Transparency is the foundation of democracy. The public had the right to know. 40 years of secrecy was too long. It prevented democratic debate. It protected criminals. It deceived the citizens. The declassification in 1998 was 50 years too late. Many of the scientists were already dead. Many victims had never experienced justice. The delay served only one purpose: avoiding embarrassment. That's not acceptable in a democracy. If you appreciate this thorough documentation, if you understand why these historical truths need to come to light, then support this channel with super thanks. This research required access to archival documents, studying Jacobsen's book, and working through declassified reports. Telling the truth is important, even when it's uncomfortable. Today, in 2025, Operation Paperclip is well documented. Jacobsen's book is standard. Historians have access to archives, but some documents remain classified. Wernher von Braun's complete dossier, certain CIA operations, certain technical reports. Why? What remains hidden 80 years after the end of the war? The answer is known only by the US government, but the fact that secrecy still exists shows the story is not yet fully told. There are still truths being hidden, maybe out of embarrassment, maybe for security reasons, maybe simply out of inertia. But democracy requires transparency. All documents should be released. The public has the right to know. The lesson from Operation Paperclip is clear. Secrecy doesn't protect national security. It protects reputations. It protects institutions. It protects those responsible from accountability. 40 years of classification was not necessary for security. It was necessary to avoid scandal, to prevent uncomfortable questions, to preserve the image of moral superiority. But the truth always comes out. Sometimes it takes decades, but it comes. And when it does, the deception is worse than the original crime. America finds itself in a similar situation again today. The China-USA tech competition, Huawei, TikTok, technology transfer, intellectual property theft. America accuses China of stealing technology, but historically, America did the same thing. 800,000 German patents, 1,600 German scientists. Systematic appropriation of foreign technology. The difference? Germany lost the war, so it was legal, or at least justified. But the parallel is obvious. Great powers take technology from wherever they can. Morality is secondary to strategic advantage. That was true in 1945. It is true in 2025. The story of Operation Paperclip is also a story about the value of knowledge. Technical knowledge is powerful. It gives nations advantages. It wins wars. It determines economic dominance. That's why America wanted German scientists. That's why they classified the documents. The knowledge was too valuable to share, too valuable to admit where it came from. This lesson is timeless. In the 21st century, technology is even more important. AI, quantum computing, biotechnology. The nation that masters these technologies will lead the world. That's why the tech competition is so intense. That's why technology is classified. That's why scientists are recruited. The tactics change. The fundamental principles remain. Wernher von Braun died in 1977. He saw people on the moon. He saw his dream realized, but his complete dossier remains classified. What's in it? We don't know exactly, but we can surmise more details about the Mittelwerk factory, more about SS activities, more about his role in the Nazi war machine, information that would undermine his reputation as a visionary, information that would damage NASA's reputation, so it remains classified. Even 48 years after his death. The deception continues. 40 years of classification, 8.5 million pages of documents, 1,600 German scientists, hundreds with Nazi pasts, dozens with war crimes, all protected, all hidden, all for technological advantage. That was Operation Paperclip. That is the documented truth, released in 1998. But the complete truth? Still partially classified, still partially hidden. The question is, why? What justifies further secrecy 80 years later? The answer is something the public should demand. Transparency is not optional. It is necessary. For democracy, for justice, for historical accuracy. Share your thoughts in the comments. Were 40 years of classification justified, or was it a cover-up? Should Wernher von Braun's complete dossier be released? Do citizens have the right to know the complete truth? Discuss below. This story is uncomfortable. But uncomfortable truths must be told, so that we learn from the past, so that we don't repeat similar mistakes, so that transparency wins over reputation. That's the lesson of Operation Paperclip. That's the lesson of 40 years of secrecy. The truth deserves to be told, even if it takes 80 years. The irony is stark. America fought against totalitarianism, against a regime that suppressed truth, against a system that put propaganda over facts. And then, America systematically classified uncomfortable truths for 40 years. That's not the same as Nazi propaganda. Of course not. But it's a compromise of democratic principles. When governments decide which truths citizens are allowed to know, that is dangerous, even with good intentions, even for national security, because who decides what is safe? Often the people who benefit from secrecy, the people whose reputations are protected. That's a conflict of interest. The 8.5 million declassified pages reveal something else, the bureaucracy of deception. It wasn't a few corrupt officials, it was a system. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, had forms for whitewashing the records, standard procedures, checklists, what to delete, what to rewrite. It was industrialized falsification. That means many people knew, JIOA officers, Pentagon generals, CIA directors, FBI agents, State Department officials. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people were involved, all kept silent for decades. That shows how powerful institutional secrecy is, how effectively classification can suppress truth. But here's the hopeful side. The truth came out, not because the government voluntarily became transparent, but because citizens pushed. Holocaust survivors, investigative journalists, historians, congressmen. They demanded accountability. They insisted on transparency. And finally, after decades, they won. The Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act was a victory for democratic accountability. It showed even powerful institutions can be forced to release the truth. It takes time. It's hard, but it's possible. That's the encouraging lesson. Annie Jacobsen's work is critical here. Without her years of research, the 8.5 million pages would just be archives, unread, unknown. She read the documents. She connected the dots. She told the story. That's why independent journalism is important. Why investigative research must be protected. Governments will not voluntarily reveal their own scandals. External scrutiny is necessary. Journalists, academics, activists, they are essential for a functioning democracy. Operation Paperclip only became known because people like Jacobsen did the work, asked the uncomfortable questions, conducted the lengthy archival research. What happens to the still classified documents, Wernher von Braun's complete dossier, certain CIA operations, certain technical reports? Will they ever be released? Possibly. If public pressure continues to grow, if new laws are passed, or possibly never, if institutions successfully argue that national security would be endangered. That's the ongoing battle, transparency versus secrecy, public right to know versus institutional interests. That battle never ends. Every generation must fight it anew. The technological dimension remains relevant. Today, we talk about AI ethics, about tech corporations with enormous power, about algorithmic transparency. The questions are similar. Who controls powerful technology? What compromises do we make for technological advantage? How do we balance innovation with ethics? Operation Paperclip is a historical example of these timeless dilemmas. America chose technological advantage over justice, over transparency, over moral consequence. Was it the right choice? Complicated, but the secrecy, that was definitely wrong. That's the clear lesson. 40 years, almost 2 generations. People born in 1945 were in their mid-40s when the truth started to emerge around 1985. Many of those responsible were dead. Many victims never saw justice. Many scientists had lived comfortable lives, honored and awarded. That is the cost of delay. Justice delayed. Is justice denied? This holds true for individual cases. It also holds true for historical truth. The longer the truth remains hidden, the less accountability is possible. the less healing for victims, and the less learning for society. This is why immediate transparency is essential, not in 40 years. Now, the story isn't over yet. New documents are still being declassified. New findings are still emerging. Researchers are still uncovering unknown details. The complete story of Operation Paperclip may never be fully told. Too many documents are lost. Too many witnesses are dead. Too many secrets remain buried. But what we do know is enough to learn from, enough to understand, enough to make sure that similar systematic deception doesn't happen again, at least not for 40 years undetected. That is the value of historical reckoning. Not perfection, but improvement, learning from mistakes, and preventing their repetition. The documented truth remains. 1945 to 1985, 40 years of systematic secrecy, 1,600 German scientists, many with Nazi pasts, hundreds of files falsified, thousands of documents classified, millions of pages hidden, all to secure technological advantage, all to avoid political embarrassment. In 1998, that changed. 8.5 million pages were released. The truth, documented. But Wernher von Braun's dossier, and still classified, the story is incomplete. The secrecy continues after 80 years. That's the uncomfortable reality we must live with. While we continue to fight for complete transparency,